Now, polls have closed in Ivory Coast's presidential election. Incumbant President Alassane Ouattara appears poised to win a fourth term in office. There have been protests over the exclusion of key challengers. The election comes amid heightened security following past violence triggered by election feuds. Critics say blacklisting opponents has given Ouattara an unfair advantage and guaranteed his victory. And from Abidjan, we're joined now by Azeezat, Olaoluwa, DW's West Africa correspondent. Azeezat, do we have a sense of who might win?
Thank you, Melissa. Well, from the vote counting process at the polling center I am, we have a sense of what we might expect across the country, according to analysts, if their prediction is correct. Inside this polling unit I am, President Alassane Ouattara, picked almost all the votes. However, the turnout was very low. I am in Yokubong, a popular base for opposition parties, the two main opposition parties with no presidential candidates in this race. And it appeared that their supporters decided to boycott the election. So the turnout in this area was quite low, and it's as reflected on the outcome of the numbers of the votes that were cast in these centers. And President Alassane Ouattara has dominated the numbers here. And it seems that before the run-up to the election, the exclusion of Laurent Gbagbo and Tijen had made many supporters of this political opposition party to accept defeat. And many of them that we spoke to today said they were afraid to even, step out of their homes due to fears of election violence, that it was best to just stay home since they knew that their votes might not count. So it appears that President Alassane Ouattara is coasting home to victory if the outcome of the results here reflects across the country.
Of course, now you've talked about citizens being intimidated. President Ouattara argues that his continued rule is necessary for stability and economic growth. It'd be his fourth term, as we've discussed, and after he changed the Constitution to allow him to stay in power. Do you have a sense whether the majority of citizens have been okay with this constitutional change? Do you have a sense whether most people do support his presidency?
Well, from the massive protest that we saw in August, we could say that the country is much divided, and so we can't say that President Ouattara had full support when he changed the constitution to essentially rewrite the script for him to be able to run for a third term and now a fourth term. And there were thousands of protesters that came out, and that was what some of the analysts said, that if the president was sure that he had popular support of the people, he wouldn't have announced a 2-month ban on protests by parties that didn't have presidential candidates. So it appeared that it was a conscious effort by the authorities to make sure they do not, have these parties with no candidates from expressing themselves, which Amnesty International and other human rights organizations have said is a repression of freedom of expression and association.
Azeezat, how significant is the return of Simone Gbagbo to politics? That's the ex-wife of the former president, Laurent Gbagbo.
Well, it's quite significant, because it appears that Simone Gbagbo is trying to rewrite her story, coming from a criminal conviction and then getting a presidential pardon by President Ouattara, essentially, gave her a rebirth, so to speak, in politics. And that was why she was able to make a huge comeback to mainstream politics. And she's loved in her region. But the question is, will she be able to pull enough votes for her to prove that she's now a relevant politician after, moving away from being an ex-first lady and now to a presidential candidate? She's one of the two female presidential candidates in this race. But the question is, will either of them, especially Simone Gbagbo, that many view as a formidable candidate in this race, to be able to, push this election to a runoff at least?
Azeezat Abiola Olaoluwa, she is DW's West Africa correspondent. Thank you very much.